Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
අර පිරිමැස්ම ගැන හිතන ඔබට Vim Liquid වෙතින් රුපියල් 100ක ඉතිරියක්.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight, this Friday, the 25th of November, 2022. Failed regulation. Power and Energy Minister Kanchana Wijesekara informs Parliament that there is no other option than revising electricity tariffs to cover CEB costs.
මේ විදුලි බිල නැවත වතාවක් සංශෝධනය කරන්න නැතුව යන්න පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ.
Parliament draws its attention to renewable energy exports from Sri Lanka.
We are definitely going to go with the grid connectivity with India.
Sri Lanka's energy capacity, particularly in renewable, may be 40,000 megawatts or more. And therefore we may not be an importer, we may be an exporter.
Energy donations. A total of 10.6 million litres of diesel donated by China to reach Sri Lankan shores tomorrow.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Indivadi Amuata. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Welcome to the news. In your top stories tonight, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara highlights the importance of revising electricity tariffs once again, claiming that the Public Utilities Commission had not approved the proposed revision of the Ceylon Electricity Board to cover recurrent costs. The minister said this in Parliament joining the budget debate on the expenditure heads of the Ministry of Power and Energy and Water Supply. During the debate, Samagi Jana Balawegya MP Iran Vikramaratne said Sri Lanka should focus on exporting renewable energy to regional countries where there is high demand for electricity imports.
අපි පහුගිය අගෝස්තු මාසේ සංශෝධනයක් කරා. හැබැයි ඒක විදුලි බල මණ්ඩලය ඉල්ලපු සංශෝධනය නෙමෙයි මහජන උපභෝගිතා කොමිසම දුන්නේ. ඒතර 850ක් වැය වෙනවා ඒ වෙලාවේ 500යි මේ සංශෝධනය ඇතුළත දුන්නේ. මේ විදුලි බිල නැවත වතාවක් සංශෝධනය කරන්න නැතුව යන්න පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ. අපිට යෝජනා කරන්නේ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය සේවා කොමසාරිස් ජනරල් වඩේ පත් කරන්න ඕන මේ තත්ත්වයටදී පොහොර, ඉන්ධන, ගල් අඟුරු, ඖෂධ, අත්‍යවශ්‍ය ආහාර, ගෑස් ටික ගන්න වෙනම පුද්ගලෙක් පත් කරන්න ඕන.
I was told with the new tariff revisions, the water board will be able to almost double their revenue, almost 54 billion according to the general manager to whom when I spoke and clarified this, he said we could manage, but then if we are to pay back all the loan installments, this may not suffice. Now this is the time where we must try and introduce public-private partnership to projects implemented by both the Power and Energy Ministry as well as the Water Supply Ministry. It's time that we try and implement. I don't know whether a PPP project will now succeed with the economy in this situation, because we need to get investors to come in and start investing in our public utilities.
It is quite evident that the government is trying to create a balance between petroleum-based power generation and renewable energy, whilst gradually moving in the direction of renewable energy to be the primary source of energy generation in Sri Lanka beyond 2030. This hybrid energy policy is the new way forward of becoming energy efficient for Sri Lanka, and the government is strengthening that policy within a liberalized energy market where competition will become the key feature. If the current liberalization and other reforms in the power and energy sector in Sri Lanka are allowed to take its course, our country will have a very competitive energy market in the region. I urge the opposition and its trade unions, particularly in the power and energy sector trade unions, to help the government to usher reforms and restructuring to make Sri Lanka's energy market and thereby attract international players to play a role in Sri Lanka.
Recently we had some debate. One of the debate was that an Adani related company had come and the Adani related company was being given a transaction by the government. What was the opposition's response to that? Our response is always there has to be competition. If it is any big project, the enabling environment must create competition. Sri Lanka has so far looked at energy more as a domestic production and a domestic usage. We are an island state. We need to look at energy also as imports and as exports.
We are definitely going to go with the grid connectivity with India. So we are looking at sharing our energy as well. So we are also in the same line with the other neighboring countries.
Sri Lanka's energy capacity, particularly in renewable, in solar and in wind power, is maybe 40,000 megawatts or more just in the northern as well as coming down the western coastline, even up to Puttlam and going on the eastern coastline. And therefore we may not be an importer, we may be an exporter of energy ultimately. We are suggesting and proposing that the arrangements and the discussions that we go into are on a multilateral basis rather than on a bilateral basis. Whether it's oil purchasers, coal purchasers, or it is non-competitive entertainment like the Adani project, right? It absolutely creates the impression that Sri Lanka is corrupt and corrupt in this area. Therefore, I would call upon the government to take immediate steps to bring the anti-corruption laws in, asset liability declarations, bring a CBOC being independent, bring a new law on stolen assets recovery and create an independent prosecutor.
We all go with you with regard to anti-corruption bill, and that has been an assurance and I think guarantee that has been given by the President that it will be brought in as soon as possible. But as you say, you might not be able to bring it today because it has to have, I think, a lot of consultation, and to make it wherever they have been successful in this in the rest of the world, I think also will have to be considered. So definitely I think we all of you very rightly said there's a public perception. The perceptions are created by, as you know, many of them are created. So you need to also to arrest this in some form or the other. We all support on this anti-corruption bill, and I'm sure that we will also put a lot of pressure from all sides to bring it as early as possible.
A lack of understanding and contradiction was clear when the Committee on Public Enterprises summoned officials of the Central Cultural Fund seeking answers as to how a sum of 10.5 billion rupees of the fund was utilised without prior approval of the board. Despite former Secretary of the Fund Chairman said that the Act covering and governing the Cultural Fund stipulates that no such requirement, the Auditor General, WPC Wickramaratne, pointed out that a section of the Act clearly outlines the need for board approval.
Buildings have been constructed at selected temples and Dhamma schools under the Sisudaham Sevana program.
380 such places were given 3 million rupees each.
That was under 3 phases. The total value of this exceeds the value given through a cabinet-appointed tender board. However, this had not gone through a cabinet-approved tender board and was not even part of the budget.
According to your report, 4 million rupees have been used for a foundation stone at just one Dhamma school. The report also states that 3 projects under Phase 1 in Kurunagala has not been completed and 15 projects under Phase 2 have not been completed in the same area. 71 projects carried out under Phase 3 in Kurunagala have not been completed as well. If 3 projects in Phase 1 weren't completed, why were funds allocated for the second phase? What was the reason behind this? Funds have been released again for the third phase, even though there were 15 incomplete projects under the second phase.
According to the Auditor General's report, 10.5 million rupees was misappropriated from the Central Cultural Fund, had not been approved by the Directors Board.
The Board of Governors approved funds to be allocated through the budget to be spent for the Sisudaham program. 1 billion rupees was withdrawn. Did you get prior approval for this? According to this Act, there is no legal requirement to obtain approval for such a withdrawal.
Look at Section 4F. It states that subject to the provisions of this Act to invest money belonging to the fund and to recall, reinvest and vary such investments at the discretion of the board and collect income occurring from such investments. The board has the authority, not just one person.
පුද්ගලයෙකුට නෙවෙයි.
මට ඉල්ලීම ආවම
When I got the request to revoke these investments, I looked at how it was done in the previous years. In the previous years, it had not even come to the secretary but had been revoked after it was put to accounts. When I looked at the history, the director board's approval was never sought to remove funds from the fixed deposit account. There were no precedents bearing witness to this.
කිසිම පූර්වාදර්ශයක් තිබිලා නැහැ.
As the officer bearing authority, was that the right course of action? According to the Central Cultural Funds Act, permission should be received for such an endeavour.
According to the Act, permission doesn't have to be obtained.
Even though you say approval is not required for such an act, laws stipulated by the Parliament state that it is a prerequisite.
Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe says the draft bill on the new Central Bank Act will be approved by the Cabinet and presented to Parliament within the next couple of weeks. Addressing the monetary policy review yesterday, the Central Bank Governor called on the exporters to share more information pertaining to the conversion of their export proceeds.
The budget has also been passed, and are there any other prior actions required other than this debt restructuring thing for you to qualify for that?
Prior actions is almost all done. Only thing, one is the Central Bank Act to be passed by the Cabinet. That's final draft is ready. I think once we get it, so that will be submitted to the Cabinet and submitted to the Parliament. That is the only prior action. If I think we can do it within the next couple of weeks.
Exporter conversion still remains a bit of a sore point. So are you planning to take any other regulatory measures going forward?
I recently made a comment on that. Export conversions, we are monitoring the situation, and we have this kind of a monitoring mechanism in place since July with banks, customs, and the financial flows. That's why we started the monitoring. And then on the basis of information we had, we are seeing not full amount has been converted, but there's a repatriation almost there. But the conversion into rupees has been less than what we expected based on the information that we had. For example, October, total amount of export proceeds repatriated $1.4 billion, $1,150 million, out of which converted into rupees is $326 million, less than 25%. But exporters are saying that their valuation is, apparel sector says 55%, tea and rubber says 95%, which means they would be able to convert more than the 25%. That's what we have been asking questions from exporters, share us with data so that there's a public perception that exporters are not converting. Without having data, we can't make that statement. That's why we encourage exporters to share your data. So your reputation is also be better if you can share us what you have done with the export process, whether you have spent for imports, you have been paying, meeting their data obligations in foreign countries, all these things. We hope exporters will support us to make even their name clear, and also for us to be able to understand with more data-driven approach for us to understand what is happening. This is the approach. I think we'll continue to monitor.
Now, Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka, Shi Zhenghong, meanwhile assured China's continued support to Sri Lanka to overcome the current challenges faced by the economy. The Chinese envoy gave this assurance to President Ranil Wickremesinghe during a meeting today. During their discussion, the Sri Lankan president and the Chinese ambassador in Colombo also reviewed progressive bilateral and multilateral negotiations on Sri Lanka's debt issue. The Chinese mission in Colombo said in a statement that misinformation by foreign media on China was taken up for discussion and were denounced. Meanwhile, a total of 9,000 metric tons of diesel donated by China is scheduled to reach Sri Lanka tomorrow. The Chinese embassy in Colombo said that the oil tanker Super Eastern carrying the diesel consignment had left Singapore and will arrive at the port of Colombo tomorrow. The diesel consignment will be distributed among farmers and fishermen in remote areas of the island to upgrade the livelihood of the most affected sectors of agriculture and fisheries. Reassuring support to Sri Lanka, the Chinese government also handed over 5,500 metric tons of rice and essential medicine worth 3 billion rupees over the past 5 months as emergency humanitarian donation to the country. Now, the United Kingdom is providing Sri Lanka with £880,000 through the Food and Agriculture Organisation to strengthen the food and nutrition security of marginal fishermen. The FAO expects to utilise the British government's support to help over 5,000 small-scale marine fishermen utilising non-motorised boats for fishing activities.
In light of World Fisheries Day, which is being celebrated this week, the government of the United Kingdom donated Sri Lanka with £880,000 to help support the fisher folk in the country that continues to engage in the livelihood, utilising non-motorised boats. The British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Sarah Hulton, announced the support to Sri Lanka by stating that they recognise the fisheries sector in Sri Lanka has been going through a very difficult period and that the UK is contributing £880,000 to help address some of the challenges faced by those working in this industry. She added that the support will focus on increasing access to nutritious food and other essentials to the families. The donation, which will be coming to the country through the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, is expected to support over 5,000 small-scale marine artisanal fishers using non-motorized traditional boats in Tangol, Negombo, Colombo, Kalutara, Galle, Mathura, Puttalam, Chilau and Mannar. Issuing a statement, the FAO stated that the fisher folk eligible for the benefit will receive $47 per month for a period of 3 months in unconditional cash transfers to help affected households meet their essential needs, including immediate food and livelihood requirements. In the meantime, the Minister of Fisheries, Douglas Devananda, appreciated the support extended to the fisheries communities, saying that fish has traditionally been a primary source of protein and a major source of foreign exchange earnings to the country. Speaking on the initiative, FAO representative in Sri Lanka and the Maldives, Vimlendra Sharan, stated that the FAO is committed to protecting the livelihoods of vulnerable fishers during this crisis and thanked the United Kingdom for extending their support for the fisheries community.
France, meanwhile, donated €500,000 towards emergency response for children and families of the UN World Food Programme in Sri Lanka. Around 9,000 families facing high levels of food insecurity will receive nutritious food and will receive help to feed their under 5 children.
The World Food Programme of the United Nations received a donation from the government of France amounting to €500,000 towards the emergency response for children and families affected by the economic crisis. The WFP expects to provide around 9,000 families facing severe levels of food insecurity with a food basket valued at ₹15,000, consisting of eggs, rice, fresh milk, red lentils and other protein-rich pulses every fortnight over a period of 1 year. Ambassador of France in Sri Lanka, Jean-Francois Pactet, said France stands in solidarity with Sri Lanka in the current crisis. The ambassador went on to say that France is committed to promote international cooperation to respond to food security, which has become a major global challenge. He added that the French contribution to the WFP in Sri Lanka will bolster the resilience of the most vulnerable populations and help fight malnutrition among children under the age of 5. Sri Lanka representative and country director of the WFP, Abdul Rahim Siddiqui, said that parents are cutting back on what they eat in order to be able to feed their children. The WFP country representative expressed his gratitude towards France for what he termed as a timely contribution, saying that this donation would enable the WFP to provide critical food assistance to young children to stave off malnutrition. According to the WFP FAO Crop and Food Security Assessment Mission carried out in June and July this year, close to 30% of the country's population, which is 6.3 million people, are currently food insecure. The WFP will work with several partners such as the Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians, the Family Health Bureau, and the Sri Lanka Red Cross Society to reach children in areas where malnutrition rates are high. The WFP stated that children who require nutritional support will be identified by medical officers and midwives at child welfare clinics, and that by working together, the partners will track child health standards by monitoring their progress over a 1-year period.
Well, as Sri Lanka tourism is marked to step up this year, what is the potential for China's cruise market in Sri Lanka? Details after this break. Well, Welcome back. The Sri Lankan embassy in Beijing says it is actively exploring the possibility of Chinese cruise ships and yachts visiting Sri Lanka with a view to attracting more Chinese tourists to the island nation. Sri Lankan ambassador to China, Dr. Palatha Kohona, held virtual discussions with the China Cruise and Yacht Industry Association, during which its Vice President Zheng Wenhang has said that Sri Lanka will be promoted as a new market for Chinese cruise ships. On the 15th of November, Dr. Kohona attended a conference of Chinese cruise ship operators when he formally proposed that Sri Lanka be designated as a destination for cruise ships after the travel restrictions are relaxed. He had also proposed creating 4 to 5 Sri Lankan cruise itineraries and ships to dock at Sri Lanka's ports for a day and give the passengers the option of taking tours in the region close to the port, thus engaging an operation as well. He specified that the China Cruise and Yacht Industry Association will work with the embassy to promote Sri Lanka at cruise-related conferences. Well, the Colombo bourse rebounded to green after a day of losses as investor confidence was reinstated following the central bank governor providing direction on future interest rates, which triggered interest on treasury counters. The main index opened on an upbeat note and continued to move on a steady upward trajectory as investors rallied on retail counters, Expo Lanka and LOLC, while LIOC continued to witness institutional interest and closed for the day at 8,148, gaining 120 points. Meanwhile, turnover improved to 1.6 billion rupees, led by the transportation sector, while solely contributing 40% to overall turnover, followed by the energy sector contributing 30%, or rather 13% of market turnover. Now here's a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies of the world during the day. Oil prices rose in thin market liquidity today, closing a week marked by worries about Chinese demand and wrangling over a Western price cap on Russian oil. Brent crude futures were up $1.29 over 1.5% to trade at $86.63 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures were up $1.56 or 2% at $79.50 a barrel. Both contracts were still headed for their third consecutive weekly decline after hitting 10-month lows this week. Vietnamese electric vehicle maker VinFast has said it had shipped its first batch of 999 cars to the United States, capping a 5-year bid to develop an auto production hub in Southeast Asian country for markets in North America and Europe. Now, the export of the first batch of Vietnamese-made units has opened a new era for the country's automotive industry. This international export is the first batch of the 65,000 global orders already made for VinFast vehicles. VinFast is expected to be able to ship a second batch of cars to the United States, its first export market, around January. Following this first batch of cars from the American market, VinFast will continue to export lots to Canada and Europe for customers' deliveries in early 2023. And that's all the news you have tonight on First at 9. But to be updated, do follow us on our socials. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
News and information you can trust 24 hours a day. Visit AdaDerana.lk.